Hello and welcome to the 2021 Macabre Month of Horror. If you're new to the Brickwall Pictures channel, the Macabre Month of Horror is a yearly series I do every October where I look back at and review horror films from all around the world. Make sure you check out past years' Macabre Months of Horror playlists. Links are in the description. Today, I'm going back to the year 2000 to a mysterious forest in Japan. Today, we're taking a look at Versus from director Ryûhei Kitamura, the film debut of the talented Tak Sakaguchi. Versus is a gonzo action film that pits an escaped prisoner against some Yakuza gangsters in the Forest of Resurrection, a place where the dead return to life. If you read the plot description, just ignore the bullshit about there being 666 portals and the 444th portal or whatever. None of that means anything. They were self-aware enough when writing the blurb to know that putting up an accurate description of the plot would not be a good way to entice potential viewers. So they just made up some junk that is almost entirely irrelevant. Versus is ridiculous and largely nonsensical, but it's also a ton of fun. But before we can get into what makes Versus good, we have to address the elephant in the room. This is an exceedingly ugly film. Versus has some of the worst cinematography you will find in a movie that's still worth watching. The picture quality, the camera work, and even the color are round-the-clock dog shit. Not every single shot is terrible from a framing and motion perspective, but the camera they shot this thing on was just way below professional camera quality. It's early digital stuff, like camcorder quality. It's owed to the low budget, but even with a limited budget, there are things that could still be smoothed out. The color, for instance. There are some sequences in the film where we cut back and forth between two different areas of the forest, and in one spot the color looks relatively normal, and in the other, everything has this nonsensical blue hue. It looks like horrible day for night, but it's clearly still supposed to be day, so it winds up just looking like the camera's white balance was off, which might have actually been the case. And this happens throughout the film. There are a couple of scenes where the color looks okay, but mostly it looks awful. It's like instead of purposely setting the white balance, they just spun a roulette wheel and set the color temperature to whatever it landed on. The visual presentation and overall production value are the biggest hurdles to clear if you want to get into this film. It genuinely looks like the kind of stuff I shot out in the woods with friends back in high school on a shitty $60 camcorder. Shooting out in the woods is a classic low-budget strategy. It's free and you can pretty much do whatever you want out there. You can shoot fake guns all you want without getting the cops called on you. And you can pretty much just light the thing with natural lighting. This is maybe the ultimate result of what you can achieve with what I'll call the no-budget high school film approach. That's not really what this is, but it is what it looks like. Versus was made for an estimated $400,000, which is extremely cheap by filmmaking standards, but honestly, I'd say Versus looks even a little cheaper than that. I wouldn't be surprised if that $400K budget projection was inflated a little bit. The director, Ryûhei Kitamura, tried to raise the budget the traditional way, but he couldn't secure funding, so he borrowed money from family and friends to get the film made instead. And it paid off as Versus became something of a cult hit once it got its home video release. In an interview, Kitamura said that most of the budget went towards lunch expenses for the cast and crew. And hey, as a no/low budget filmmaker, I've been there, man. You can cut a lot of production expenses, but feeding people is not one of them, and it's a lot more expensive than people realize. If you can get past the film's ugly aesthetic, then Versus is a ridiculously fun time. It doesn't take itself seriously in the slightest. The protagonist, he's a little flat. I mean, there's virtually nothing at all to him on a writing level, but he has plenty of badassery to make up for that. Where the acting shines is in the cavalcade of villains. These guys are all so much fun, especially the suit-wearing Yakuza baddie played by Kenji Matsuda, who doesn't even have a profile picture on IMDb. He spends the entire film absolutely chewing up the scenery and having a great time. The amount of fun the actor is clearly having in the role is infectious as a viewer. His mannerisms, expressions, and the general demeanor are so far removed from reality. He's a straight-up cartoon character, and it is a joy to watch. His performance is perfectly reflective of the overall tone of the film, and I actually think that Versus could be stronger overall if every performance was as heightened as his. And I mean, some of them are. The prison warden guy who claims to be 500 times faster than Mike Tyson, he's a ton of fun. And the shorter Yakuza guy who's constantly losing his gun and pulling a new one out of nowhere is appropriately over the top as well. If you go into Versus expecting a serious zombie film or a serious action film, you will not be getting what you're looking for. Some of the action is pretty damn cool, but none of it makes any attempt to be realistic or particularly intense. It's all about style and fun factor. Versus is hilarious, and the humor is all intentional. Everything is tongue-in-cheek. And sometimes that tongue busts straight through the cheek, if you know what I'm saying. This is basically a spoof movie. All that being said, it is longer than it needs to be. 2 hours is more than necessary for this kind of film, especially when the thin plot kind of feels like it was just made up as they went along. There's just enough connective tissue to have a through-line plot, but nothing feels particularly well thought out. The way additional characters are introduced throughout feels especially cheap, really. It's just kind of random, like, oh, we need someone new to fight. Okay, there's more people here now. And then the new people who show up, they are fun, but it's just all so random and unseated. By the way, you'll never guess this director's next movie. The very next thing Ryûhei Kitamura directed was Sky High. Just kidding. It's actually a different movie called Sky High that he made next. He has messed around with some mainstream U.S. filmmaking, though. He made The Midnight Meat Train, that adaptation of the Clive Barker Books of Blood short story, which wasn't great. Vinnie Jones is really good at it, though. The short story, on the other hand, is quite good. You can hear my full thoughts on Midnight Meat Train and the rest of Clive Barker's Books of Blood in my review of volumes 1 through 3. Link to that is in the description. Also, Hideo Kojima, creators of video games like Death Stranding and the Metal Gear Solid franchise, is rumored to be in this. I didn't spot him myself, but supposedly he's in there. I guess as one of the zombies. This is a rumor that I believe, as there is a clear connection between Kitamura and Kojima. Kitamura was the cutscene director for Kojima's Metal Gear Solid remake package, The Twin Snakes. So they know each other. Versus ends with some pretty clear sequel bait, though a sequel has still yet to come 21 years later. At this point, it's a pretty safe bet that it won't ever happen. I actually think that an eventual remake is more likely, but I'm sure either approach would have no trouble finding funding at this point, as it brought in quite a return on its small budget and helped launch a number of associated careers. Versus itself was a sequel at its inception, though that idea was eventually cast aside. Versus was planned as a sequel to Kitamura's previous film, Down to Hell, before being tweaked to stand on its own. If you're looking for a zombie film that is extremely different from the norm of the genre, then Versus might be just what you're looking for. It's an incredibly fun time, and I know I'll be watching it again. Check it out, and check out the rest of this year's Macabre Month of Horror playlist in the description. Make sure you subscribe to Brickwall Pictures. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.